Black CEO's daughter disguises as cleaner to test staff, fires them days later. The humiliation in the air was palpable. "Don't you ever talk back to me, Gerald," the white man hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You are nothing here, nothing. Clean this room now, or don't bother coming back tomorrow." "Sir, the floors are spotless. I've cleaned them over and over again." Jasmine, the black cleaner, responded firmly. Without a word, Gerald picked up a full cup of water and deliberately poured it over her. The cold liquid drenched her hair, streamed down her face, and soaked through her uniform. It pooled at her feet, ruining the freshly mopped floor. The sudden shock of the water made her gasp, but it was the sheer cruelty of the act that truly took her breath away. "Now you have something real to clean up," Gerald sneered. Little did he know, the woman he had just humiliated wasn't just a simple cleaner. She was the one who had the power to end his entire career. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button if you believe that no one deserves to be treated unfairly, no matter who they are. And drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. You'll definitely get a reply. The executive floor of Williams Innovations gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Jasmine Williams, now disguised in a maintenance uniform, carefully guided her mop across the polished surface. The nameplate on her chest read Janet, hiding her true identity. The same hands that had signed multi-million-dollar contracts were now rough and red from handling industrial cleaning solutions. As she worked, the sharp click of expensive leather shoes echoed behind her. Gerald Hayes, the operations manager, a man who had never even looked her in the eye during executive meetings, now loomed over her, holding a thick stack of reports in his well-manicured hands. Jasmine's sharp, commanding eyes, so used to leading boardrooms, flashed with quiet fury. She clenched her jaw, silently nodding as she bent down to retrieve the now-soaked documents. Every fiber of her being screamed to reveal the truth, to fire this man on the spot. But that wasn't the plan. That wasn't why she was here. Jasmine Williams was no ordinary cleaner. At 28, she was a Harvard Business School graduate, a rising star in the industry, and had even been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 for her groundbreaking work in sustainable technology. She was known for her sharp mind, strong leadership, and unwavering determination. Her father, Robert Williams, had built Williams Innovations from the ground up, starting in his garage 35 years ago with nothing but a dream and a $2,000 loan from his grandmother. Over time, he turned it into a $5 billion fintech empire, breaking barriers as one of the few black CEOs in Silicon Valley. Now 60, Robert's silver-streaked hair and deep laugh lines told the story of a man who had faced and conquered countless challenges. But lately, his usually vibrant demeanor had begun to fade. The heart attack 6 months ago had been a wake-up call. Doctors were clear Robert had to slow down. The 80-hour workweeks he had survived on for decades were no longer an option. Succession planning, once a conversation for the distant future, had suddenly become an urgent reality. Jasmine, as his only child and the executive he had been grooming for years, was the natural choice to take over. But Robert had his doubts. Doubts that weighed on him more than any business deal ever had. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table in their sleek, modern home overlooking the city skyline, Robert finally voiced his concerns. "Jasmine, you know I couldn't be prouder of everything you've accomplished," he began, his deep voice carrying both warmth and authority, the same authority that had inspired thousands of employees over the years. "Your business acumen is extraordinary, your technical knowledge impressive, but I'm worried about what you don't know." Jasmine lowered her fork, one perfectly arched eyebrow rising. "What don't I know, Dad?" Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't know what it's like in the trenches. You've never seen how this company truly operates from the ground up. You don't know how management treats the people who keep this company running, the ones without fancy titles or corner offices." Jasmine opened her mouth to protest, but Robert held up a hand. "When I started this company, I was the janitor, the accountant, the salesman, and the engineer. I knew every aspect of my business because I had done every single job. That kind of knowledge is priceless." He leaned forward, his piercing eyes, so much like hers, full of something Jasmine rarely saw in them: concern. "I've been hearing whispers, Jasmine, that the company culture isn't what we built it to be. That some of our managers, people we trust, are mistreating employees. But no one tells the CEO the whole truth. They perform for us. We need to see what's really happening." The challenge hung heavy in the air. Jasmine never backed down from a challenge. She met her father's gaze. "So, what are you suggesting?" That night, they devised a bold plan. For 2 weeks, Jasmine would go undercover as a night shift cleaner. No special treatment.
No shortcuts. No privileges.
She would experience Williams' innovations the way thousands of employees did, from the very bottom of the corporate ladder. The transformation was drastic. Her designer wardrobe was swapped for worn, secondhand clothes. Her sleek, straightened hair was left to return to its natural curls, then tucked under a simple headscarf. Her immaculate manicure was removed, her signature makeup abandoned. For all intents and purposes, Jasmine Williams no longer existed. Janet, the cleaner, had taken her place. Jasmine removed her recognizable designer glasses, replacing them with contact lenses. The diamond studs that had always adorned her ears were swapped for simple metal hoops. Gone was the polished executive. Now, in her place stood Janet, an unremarkable cleaning woman, someone who would easily fade into the background of corporate life. To ensure complete secrecy, Robert arranged her placement through a third-party cleaning service, ProClean, making sure that no one in HR would make the connection. Her background check and paperwork were handled with the utmost discretion, creating a foolproof cover identity. As far as anyone at Williams Innovations knew, Janet was simply a new cleaner assigned to the executive floor. The stakes were clear. Jasmine had 2 weeks to uncover the true culture of the company she was about to lead. 2 weeks to determine if her father's legacy still reflected the values he had instilled when he founded it. What she didn't realize was that those 2 weeks would completely transform her understanding of Williams Innovations and her entire worldview. The next evening, fully disguised as Janet, Jasmine adjusted her ill-fitting uniform, her fingers fidgeting with the unfamiliar employee badge clipped to her chest. It was her first shift, and for the first time in years, she felt nervous stepping into a workplace. Her hands were now bare, no rings, no polished nails. The weight of the mop in her grip felt foreign, but she knew she had to blend in. Her shift began at 10 p.m., long after most executives had left the building. The orientation was brief and impersonal. A hurried walkthrough of cleaning procedures, safety regulations, and a stern warning that any theft would lead to immediate termination and possible criminal charges. The supervisor barely acknowledged her, handing her a ring of keys and a checklist of duties before moving on without so much as a second glance. Throughout her life, Jasmine Williams had commanded attention, as Robert Williams' daughter, as a Harvard graduate, and as a high-ranking executive. People noticed when she entered a room. They made eye contact. They acknowledged her. But as Janet the cleaner, she was invisible. Executives stepped around her without a word, some even bumping into her cleaning cart without an apology. When she entered offices where employees were still working, they didn't pause their conversations, openly discussing confidential business matters as if she weren't even there. By the end of her first shift, Jasmine's hands were raw, her muscles ached, and exhaustion weighed on her like never before. But more than anything, she had begun to see patterns in how employees treated the cleaning staff. Each night revealed new truths about Williams' innovations, truths she had never imagined, despite spending years as an executive. The company her father built, with its values of respect, integrity, and innovation, looked very different from the bottom looking up. By the start of her second shift, Jasmine, still disguised as Janet, was beginning to adjust to the physical demands of the job. The muscle soreness had dulled into a constant ache rather than sharp pain. The blisters on her hands had hardened into calluses. She had even learned to move efficiently, distributing her weight while mopping to prevent back strain. But no amount of physical adjustment could have prepared her for the psychological battle that awaited her. A battle led by Gerald Hayes, operations supervisor. At 45 years old, Gerald Hayes prided himself on running a tight ship. He had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination, gaining a reputation for delivering results, no matter the human cost. With his perfectly pressed shirts, meticulously styled hair, and ever-present leather portfolio, Gerald projected an image of authority and control. To upper management, he was seen as efficient, dedicated, and highly competent. To the cleaning staff, however, he was nothing short of a tyrant. Gerald's unpredictable moods and impossible standards made the cleaning crew's already difficult jobs nearly unbearable. "This is unacceptable," he snapped during an inspection, holding up a gloved hand with the faintest trace of dust from a ceiling vent not even on the regular cleaning schedule. "You people need to understand that Williams Innovations represents excellence in everything." "Everything?" he growled, glaring at the exhausted crew. He then demanded the entire third-floor east wing be recleaned, forcing the staff to stay 2 hours past their shift without additional pay. When Maria, one of the more experienced cleaners, attempted to explain that vent cleaning was scheduled for quarterly deep maintenance, not nightly work, Gerald cut her off. "If I wanted excuses, I'd ask for them," he snapped. "What I want is competence, which seems to be in short supply around here." While Gerald treated all of the cleaning staff harshly, he seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting Jasmine. Maybe it was because she was new and hadn't yet learned to disappear when he walked by. Maybe it was something in her demeanor, a lingering confidence she couldn't fully hide. Whatever the reason, Gerald had decided to make Janet his personal project. No matter how well she cleaned, Gerald always found fault. The windows had streaks, visible only when viewed from a certain angle under bright light. The carpets weren't perfect, as he pointed out microscopic pieces of lint. Every night, he pushed harder. But what Gerald didn't know was that his cruelty wasn't just breaking down a cleaner. He was sealing his own fate. The third round of vacuuming was deemed necessary. Stainless steel surfaces that gleamed under normal inspection suddenly revealed unacceptable fingerprints under Gerald's scrutinizing gaze. During Jasmine's first solo shift cleaning the executive restrooms, Gerald arrived for a surprise inspection, while she was still in the middle of her work. Instead of waiting for her to finish, he began his evaluation immediately, criticizing her progress, her technique, her choice of cleaning solutions, and even the way she had organized her cart. "Are you deliberately trying to be this incompetent, or does it just come naturally to you?" he asked, his voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "This is exactly why we should outsource all cleaning to robots. At least they follow instructions correctly the first time." Jasmine bit her tongue, swallowing the sharp retort that burned at the back of her throat. In her role as executive VP, she could have ended Gerald's career with a single email. But as Janet the cleaner, she had no power, no authority, no voice. She had no choice but to apologize and promise to do better. The other cleaners had noticed Gerald's fixation on the new girl and tried to warn her. After one particularly brutal encounter, when Gerald's sharp words left her hands shaking as she restocked her cleaning cart, Darnell, a longtime cleaner at the company, pulled her aside. "You need to stay out of his way," he advised in a low voice, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they weren't overheard. Jasmine was beginning to understand why. Then, Thursday night, during the first week of her undercover shift, something happened. She was cleaning the hallway outside the main conference room on the executive floor, her cart neatly positioned against the wall to allow people to pass easily. It was 11:30 p.m., and the building was almost empty. Most offices were dark, their occupants long gone. Jasmine had just finished refilling her bucket with fresh cleaning solution when she heard the distinctive sound of Gerald's leather dress shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he approached, he stopped directly beside her cart, surveying her work with an exaggerated expression of scrutiny. And then it happened. With deliberate carelessness, as Gerald resumed walking, he swung his arm out, catching the side of Jasmine's perfectly organized cleaning cart. Crashed down with a loud thud. Cleaning supplies scattered across the floor. A fresh bottle of disinfectant spilled, mixing with dirty water from the overturned mop bucket. Gerald paused, surveying the mess he had just created. A barely suppressed smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Without a word, he stepped through the spilled liquid, leaving dirty footprints across the floor Jasmine had spent the last hour perfecting. He never looked back. never acknowledged what he had done, never offered to help, never apologized. To him, it wasn't even worth mentioning. Jasmine stood frozen, staring at the wreckage before her. And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just about disrespect. This wasn't just about being invisible. This was calculated cruelty, the deliberate abuse of power with no fear of consequences. As she knelt down to begin cleaning up the mess, fighting back the frustration and rage, she realized this wasn't just about understanding the company culture anymore. This wasn't just about proving herself worthy of succession. This was about justice. Justice for the invisible workforce, the people who kept Williams Innovations running. The same kind of people her father had once been before he built his empire. When Gerald's harassment escalated in the days that followed, Jasmine was ready. She documented everything: times, dates, witnesses, exact quotes. She observed which executives enabled his behavior and which ones seemed uncomfortable but stayed silent. Piece by piece, she built a case, all while maintaining her cover as Janet, the invisible cleaner. Then came the moment that changed everything. Gerald returned minutes later after knocking over her cart. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he hissed, stepping closer. Jasmine remained silent, knowing that anything she said would only escalate the situation. She focused on gathering her supplies, intending to move to the next office and escape the confrontation. "I'm speaking to you," Gerald snapped. The proper response when a supervisor addresses you is, "Yes, sir," or "No, sir." Didn't they teach you basic respect in whatever gutter they pulled you from? Jasmine's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir," she forced out. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. She had just begun mopping the hallway outside the executive conference room when Gerald stepped onto the freshly cleaned floor, deliberately, leaving dirty footprints across the wet surface. "This floor is still filthy," he announced loudly, as if speaking to an audience, though they were alone in the corridor. "Can't you do anything right? Look at these stains. Look at these spots you missed." Jasmine glanced down. The floor was spotless, gleaming under the recessed lighting. There were no stains, no missed spots, except for the footprints Gerald himself had just created. "I just cleaned it, sir," she said evenly, forcing herself to stay calm. "It was dry and spotless before. Are you contradicting me again?" Gerald cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Do you think you know more about cleanliness standards at Williams Innovations than I do?" Jasmine knew what was coming, but she hadn't expected this. Without another word, Gerald picked up a full cup of water and poured it directly onto Jasmine. The cold water soaked her hair, ran down her face, drenched her uniform, pooled at her feet on the freshly mopped floor. She gasped from the shock, but it wasn't the coldness that stole her breath. It was the cruelty, the deliberate humiliation. "Now you have something real to clean up," Gerald said smoothly, his voice eerily calm. He dropped the empty cup onto the floor beside her. "And don't even think about leaving until you're dry and this floor is spotless. I'll be checking personally before you clock out." Jasmine didn't move. She just stood there, dripping, heart pounding. Gerald turned and walked away. But this time, Jasmine wasn't just going to clean up the mess. She was going to burn his entire world down. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next part of the story. Jasmine stood frozen, water dripping from her soaked hair and clothes, forming small puddles around her feet. The humiliation burned hotter than any anger she had ever felt. At that moment, she wasn't Jasmine Williams, Harvard graduate and executive VP. She wasn't even Janet the cleaner. She was simply a human being, one being treated as less than human by someone who knew there would be no consequences for his actions. As the cold water trickled down her skin, Jasmine fought back tears of frustration, refusing to let them mix with the moisture already on her face. Slowly, she knelt and began mopping up the water, her soaked uniform clinging uncomfortably to her body. And as she worked, she made a silent vow. Gerald Hayes would face consequences for his actions. Not just for what he had done to her, but for the culture of fear and humiliation he had created for the invisible workforce that kept Williams Innovations running. One might think Gerald was the only one, but there was also Derek Phillips, the marketing director at Williams Innovations. Derek embodied the creative executive persona. At 42, he had a carefully curated image, designer glasses, artfully tousled hair, and bespoke suits that projected success without seeming too corporate. Jasmine's first encounter with Derek occurred during her second week undercover. His office was on her cleaning rotation that night. What should have been a 20-minute task, according to the cleaning schedule, ended up consuming over 3 hours of her shift, leaving her scrambling to finish her other assigned areas before clocking out. When Jasmine first entered his office shortly after 10 p.m., Derek was still at his desk, staring intently at his computer screen. Unlike many executives, who either ignored the cleaning staff entirely or simply offered a brief nod before returning to their work, Derek immediately engaged her. "Oh, good. You're here," he said, still focused on his screen. "This office is an absolute disaster. We had a creative brainstorming session today, and it needs a thorough cleaning." Jasmine glanced around. To her now experienced eye, the office was relatively tidy. A few coffee cups sat on a side table. Some papers were arranged in neat piles. It hardly justified his description of absolute disaster. Still, she nodded and began her standard cleaning routine, starting with emptying the trash bins. For several minutes, Derek watched her work. His attention shifted between his computer and her movements around the office. As she finished dusting the bookshelves and moved to clean the glass coffee table, he cleared his throat dramatically. "That's not how you clean glass properly," he declared, rising from his desk and walking over. "You're leaving streaks everywhere. You need to use circular motions, not straight lines." Derek observed her with unnecessary scrutiny, pointing out non-existent flaws and offering unsolicited advice about proper cleaning methods, as if his marketing degree had somehow made him an expert in professional cleaning techniques. After Jasmine had wiped every surface, vacuumed the carpet, and sanitized all high-touch areas according to protocol, Derek performed a theatrical inspection. He ran his finger along surfaces, holding them up to the light as if checking for dust under a microscope. "This simply won't do," he declared, exaggerated disappointment in his voice. "The windows still have smudges. The carpet has visible lint. And did you even bother to dust the top of the picture frames?" Jasmine looked around, stunned. The office was immaculate. There were no visible issues with any of the areas he had mentioned. But as Janet the cleaner, she had no authority to contradict him. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, and she started over from the beginning. As Jasmine cleaned the office a second time, Derek returned to his desk, a satisfied expression flickering across his face. This time, she took even greater care, anticipating his inevitable criticisms. But when she finished, Derek once again performed his inspection. This time, he focused on different areas. "The baseboards are still dusty, and my desk isn't properly organized," he said dismissively, despite the strict rule that cleaning staff weren't allowed to touch personal items on desks. "And what's that smell?" he added, wrinkling his nose. "Did you use the wrong cleaning solution? This room should smell fresh and clean, not like chemicals." The cycle repeated a third time. Each time, Derek found new, increasingly trivial issues. By the time he finally declared himself satisfied and left for the night, it was well past midnight, and Jasmine was hopelessly behind schedule. Soon, Jasmine learned that Derek's behavior was a well-established pattern. He regularly demanded multiple cleanings of his already pristine office, inventing flaws to justify his demands. He would balance coffee cups precariously on the edges of trash bins, ensuring they would spill when emptied. He would scatter paper clips across freshly vacuumed carpets, only to complain about poor cleaning quality afterward. It was all a game to him, another way to exert power over those he saw as beneath him. After the water bottle incident with Gerald, Jasmine had decided to test the company's reporting structures. If Williams Innovations truly valued dignity and respect, as its corporate values claimed, surely HR would take action against such blatant abuse. Mitchell, the HR director, seemed like the perfect person to approach. In her mid-40s, she had a warm smile and a business-casual style that suggested approachability. Jasmine hoped that HR would be the solution, but she was about to find out just how deep the rot went. Karen had worked hard to cultivate an approachable image. The employee support posters around the building displayed her photo along with an invitation. "Talk to me. Your voice matters." Her office door was adorned with a rainbow sticker and the words "Safe Space" in friendly typography. The day after the incident with Gerald and the water bottle, Jasmine carefully approached Karen's office during her lunch break. The HR director greeted her with a genuine smile, offering her a seat and even a cup of coffee from her personal machine. "What can I do for you today?" Karen asked, her tone warm and inviting. "I don't think we've met before. Are you new to the cleaning staff?" Jasmine explained that she was indeed new and hesitantly described the incident with Gerald, the public humiliation and the water bottle. She kept her account factual and composed, presenting the situation as she would have advised an employee to report misconduct if she were still in her role as executive VP. Karen's expression remained sympathetic throughout, her head tilting slightly in what appeared to be genuine concern. When Jasmine finished, Karen sighed deeply and reached across the desk to pat her hand in what could have been interpreted as either comforting or condescending. "First, I want to thank you for bringing this to my attention," Karen began, her voice taking on the careful cadence of rehearsed corporate speech. "We take all reports of workplace incidents very seriously here at Williams Innovations. That said, I think there may be some confusion about workplace relationships." Her tone was still gentle, but now it carried a hint of something else, a subtle dismissiveness that hadn't been present before. "You're just a cleaner, and you need to know your place in a company like this. You can't compare yourself to other employees." The message was clear beneath the corporate jargon. "You don't really count as an employee. Your dignity is not our concern." Jasmine thanked Karen for her time and stood to leave, but Karen offered a final bit of advice. Lowering her voice as though sharing a confidence, she added, "Gerald can be demanding when it comes to cleanliness standards. He has high expectations, and sometimes his communication style can be a bit direct. My suggestion is to focus on meeting those standards rather than taking things personally. In corporate environments, thick skin is an asset." With that final dismissal, thinly veiled as mentorship, Jasmine was effectively shown the door. The safe space sign almost mocked her as she left, its promise clearly not extending to those who cleaned the building after hours. What Karen didn't know was that Jasmine had secretly recorded their entire conversation on her phone, a key piece of documentation that would later serve as crucial evidence of how the company systematically failed its most vulnerable workers. But if Gerald and Derek's cruelty had shown Jasmine the systematic nature of workplace abuse, her encounter with Veronica Wells would reveal its most shocking physical manifestation. Veronica Wells, Senior Vice President of Sales, was a legend at Williams Innovations. Her sales team consistently exceeded targets, her presentations at industry conferences were standing-room-only events, and her aggressive negotiation style had secured deals that transformed the company's market position. At 45, she had the confidence of someone who knew her worth to the organization, combined with the temperament of someone unaccustomed to being challenged. The confrontation occurred on Friday evening during Jasmine's third week undercover. She had been assigned to clean the main conference room on the 38th floor. Veronica's sharp voice suddenly broke the air. "Excuse me, where do you think you're going?" Jasmine stopped, taken aback by the direct address. "I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but this room is scheduled for cleaning at 9 p.m. I'll return later when you're finished." It was a reasonable response, polite and professional. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the end of it. But Veronica Wells didn't adhere to normal workplace conventions. "How dare you disrupt my meeting?" she snapped, stepping closer to Jasmine. "Do I really have to waste my valuable time explaining basic professional courtesy to someone who cleans toilets for a living?" The verbal attack was loud enough for employees in nearby offices to glance through the glass walls of the conference room, watching the confrontation unfold. But, like the salespeople inside, they chose not to intervene. Jasmine had already withstood Gerald's water assault and Derek's humiliation, but something about Veronica's words was just too much. Perhaps it was the sheer injustice of being berated for simply following the schedule that triggered a response deep within her. A response that was pure Jasmine Williams, rather than Janet the cleaner. "With all due respect," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I'm following the established protocol for this building. If there's a conflict with the cleaning schedule, the proper procedure is to notify facilities management in advance so adjustments can be made. I'm just trying to do my job, just like you're doing yours." The room fell silent. The junior salespeople froze, expressions frozen in shock and disbelief that a cleaner would dare respond to Veronica Wells in such a manner. For Veronica herself, it took a moment before she regained her composure, momentarily stunned by the articulate pushback from someone she had dismissed as a nobody. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Veronica's face twisted with fury. Without warning, her hands swung out in a sharp arc, landing with a loud crack against Jasmine's cheek, the sound echoing throughout the now silent conference room. The force of the slap sent Jasmine stumbling back, crashing into her cleaning cart. "Don't you ever talk back to me?" Veronica snarled, her voice low and menacing. "You're nothing here, nothing. Clean this room now, or don't bother coming back tomorrow." Pain radiated across Jasmine's cheek, but it was nothing compared to the shock that froze her in place. In all her years in corporate America, through Harvard Business School and the executive ranks, she had never witnessed such an open physical assault in a professional setting, let alone experience it firsthand. The junior salespeople in the room stared at their laptops, their notes, the ceiling, anywhere but the scene they had just witnessed. No one spoke, no one intervened, no one offered help. Their collective silence was its own form of violence, a tacit agreement that what had occurred was either acceptable or, at the very least, not worth risking their own careers to address. In that moment, Jasmine nearly broke character. The urge to reveal herself, to shift from Janet the cleaner to Jasmine Williams, executive vice president and daughter of the founder, was nearly overwhelming. One sentence could have destroyed Veronica's career in an instant, but some deeper instinct held her back. And so, with surprising discipline, Jasmine maintained her cover. She lowered her eyes, mumbled an apology, and began cleaning the conference room. The red mark on her cheek burned with humiliation, but her mind had never been clearer. This was her breaking point, not because the slap hurt more than Gerald's assault or Derek's humiliation, but because it symbolized the culmination of a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Williams Innovations, the company her father had built on principles of dignity and respect, had become a place where employees could be physically assaulted without consequence or comment. As she mechanically wiped down surfaces around the oblivious sales team, Jasmine's mission shifted. She was no longer just observing the company culture or gathering general impressions. Now, she was collecting evidence for what would become the most significant corporate restructuring in Williams Innovations' history. Every interaction, every abuse, every failure of leadership would be documented. Names would be recorded. Incidents would be dated and detailed. And when her 2 weeks undercover were over, the reckoning would begin. If you were in Jasmine's shoes, what would you do to them all? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss the next part of the story. By the end of her second week undercover, Jasmine Williams had experienced enough mistreatment to justify ending her experiment and returning to her executive role. She had witnessed systemic abuse from multiple leaders and experienced both verbal and physical assault. Her first step was to create a secure system for collecting evidence. The cleaning cart provided the perfect cover. No one paid attention to the supplies arranged in its various compartments, allowing her to easily conceal a small, powerful camera and digital voice recorder among the bottles and rags. Her phone, kept silenced in her pocket, allowed her to capture still images when necessary, though she used it sparingly to avoid detection. Her nights now followed a new routine. While continuing to perform her cleaning duties with the same careful attention as before, she strategically positioned herself to document conversations in meeting rooms, photograph documents left carelessly on desks, and record after-hours interactions that revealed the true culture of Williams Innovations. Soon, Jasmine had accumulated a damning collection of evidence, documenting everything. Through the recordings, she discovered the 3 people who had made her life miserable as a cleaner, were hiding even more secrets. They had been secretly diverting some of the company's funds meant for lower workers into their own pockets, as well as leaking company information to their competitors in an attempt to get Mr. Robert out as CEO before the succession could happen. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. As the end of her undercover period approached, Jasmine faced a critical decision about how to proceed. Simply presenting the evidence to her father would address the immediate conspiracy, but it might not solve the deeper cultural issues that had allowed such corruption to flourish. A more public approach risked damaging the company's reputation and harming innocent employees in the process. After gathering overwhelming evidence of systematic abuse, discrimination, and conspiracy at Williams Innovations, Jasmine Williams faced her most significant challenge yet: how to expose the corruption in a way that would lead to meaningful change, rather than mere damage control. The final phase of her undercover journey would require perfect timing, strategic thinking, and the courage to confront the people who had humiliated and abused her over the past month. The preparation began on Friday evening, the last week of her undercover shift. After finishing her duties and ensuring no one was following her, she changed into her own clothes in a public restroom several blocks away from Williams Innovations headquarters. The transformation was striking. The headscarf was removed, her natural hair styled with professional precision, designer glasses replacing the plain frames of her disguise, and subtle makeup enhancing features she had deliberately downplayed for weeks. She then took a rideshare to her father's home in the exclusive Hillcrest neighborhood, a modernist mansion with glass walls offering panoramic views of the city skyline, including the Williams Innovations Tower, where she had been scrubbing floors just hours earlier. The physical distance between these worlds was measured in miles, but the psychological distance felt immeasurable. After her month in the trenches, Robert Williams was waiting in his home office, his expression serious. "You look exhausted," he said simply, studying her face with paternal concern. "I am," Jasmine admitted, "but not just physically. I'm emotionally drained by what I've discovered." For the next 3 hours, she systematically presented her findings, using her laptop to display emails, performance reviews, financial discrepancies, and video evidence of abuse. She documented the systematic mistreatment of support staff. Robert listened in silence, his expression darkening as the evidence mounted. When she showed him the video of Veronica Wells slapping Janet the cleaner, his fist clenched involuntarily. When she played the recording of Gerald Hayes pouring water on her, his jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "They've betrayed everything this company stands for," he said, his voice quiet but vibrating with intensity. "Everything I've built, everything I believed in." Jasmine nodded, understanding that her father's reaction wasn't just about the personal affront to his daughter, but about the violation of the principles upon which he had built his life's work. "The question is," she said, "how do we address this in a way that creates real change?" Together, they devised a strategy to expose the corruption publicly. Robert would call an emergency board meeting for Monday morning to discuss urgent company concerns that had come to his attention. All department heads and senior management would be required to attend, including Gerald, Karen, Derek, Marcus, and Veronica, the 5 executives at the center of the conspiracy. The board members would be briefed in advance on the general nature of the issues, but not on the specific evidence or Jasmine's undercover role. This would ensure their genuine reactions when the full situation was revealed. Most importantly, Jasmine would continue her role as Janet the cleaner through Monday morning, maintaining her cover until the precise moment of revelation. This would require one final night of humiliation, but it would be worth it for the justice that would follow. Their planning continued well past midnight, addressing contingencies and refining the approach. Before Jasmine left, Robert hugged her again, this time with a new respect in his eyes. "I thought this experience would teach you about leadership," he said, "but it seems you're teaching me. Whatever happens Monday, I want you to know I'm proud of you, not just as my daughter, but as the future of Williams Innovations." By Sunday night, everything was in place. The board had been notified, the evidence prepared, and security personnel quietly briefed on potential responses when the revelations became public. All that remained was the confrontation itself and Jasmine's final performance as Janet the cleaner. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight gleaming off the glass and steel of the Williams Innovations Tower. Jasmine arrived in her cleaner's uniform for what would be her last shift in disguise. She had deliberately scheduled herself for the executive floor, ensuring she would be assigned to clean the boardroom before the 10 a.m. emergency meeting. At 8:30 a.m., as executives began arriving for their normal workday, unaware of the reckoning to come, Jasmine pushed her cleaning cart toward the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor. The space was impressive. A massive oval table of polished walnut surrounded by leather chairs. She had just begun dusting when Gerald Hayes entered, his expression sour at finding her there. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, briefcase clutched in one hand and coffee in the other. "This room needs to be perfect for an emergency board meeting at 10. "I'm assigned to clean it, sir," Jasmine replied, maintaining the respectful tone she had perfected over the past month. "I'll be finished well before 10. Gerald's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. "Make sure it's actually clean this time," he said, his tone condescending. "The CEO and board members will be here. If I find a single speck of dust, you'll be fired. I'll check your work before the meeting," he added, his tone making it clear he was hoping to find fault. "Now get moving. People will be arriving soon." By 9:45 a.m., executives and board members had begun gathering outside the boardroom, their expressions confused or concerned about the unexpected meeting. Robert Williams arrived last, acknowledging greetings with brief nods, but offering no explanation for the emergency session. His eyes briefly met Jasmine's as she mopped near the door. A subtle glance passed between them, conveying volumes of unspoken communication before he turned away to maintain his composure. At 9:55 a.m., Gerald returned to inspect the boardroom, making a show of checking surfaces for dust and running his finger along the windowsill as the executives began taking their seats around the table. "You missed spots on the windows," he declared loudly, though the glass was immaculate. "And the table hasn't been properly polished. This is exactly the kind of sloppy work I've come to expect from new hires. I'll handle it right away." "I'll take care of it, sir," Jasmine replied, moving to clean areas that didn't need attention. As the clock struck 10 a.m., Robert Williams called the meeting to order, his authoritative voice cutting through the murmur of conversations around the table. Jasmine continued her cleaning in the background, moving quietly around the room's perimeter, seemingly focused on her work but missing nothing of the discussion. "I've called this emergency meeting to address serious concerns about the corporate culture at Williams Innovations," Robert began, his tone grave. "Over the past month, evidence has come to my attention suggesting that we've strayed significantly from the core values on which I built this company." The room fell silent, executives exchanging uneasy glances. Karen from HR straightened in her seat, pen poised over her notepad as though preparing to document solutions to a problem she had helped create. Derek Phillips maintained his carefully crafted creative persona, though his fingers nervously drummed on the table. Marcus Winters adjusted his tie repeatedly, while Veronica Wells wore a mask of professional interest, revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Get out!" Gerald shouted, trying to rid the room of the cleaning lady. "This is sensitive corporate business." The moment had arrived, the culmination of 2 weeks of humiliation, documentation, and strategic patience. All eyes briefly turned toward the unassuming cleaner in the gray uniform, expecting her to scurry from the room as commanded. Instead, Jasmine carefully placed her mop against the wall. She straightened to her full height, squared her shoulders, and turned to face the assembled executives with a calm dignity that immediately commanded attention. Looking directly at Gerald Hayes, she spoke in a clear, confident voice that bore no resemblance to Janet's deferential tones. "Actually, I'd like to stay," Jasmine interrupted, using his first name with the casual authority of someone who had every right to do so. "But I think you're the one who doesn't understand the situation." With deliberate movements, she removed the headscarf that had concealed her hair, letting her natural curls frame her face. She took off the plain glasses that had been part of her disguise and reached into her pocket to replace them with her designer frames. Finally, she unzipped the gray cleaner's uniform to reveal a professionally tailored blazer and blouse underneath. The transformation was electric. Around the table, expressions shifted from confusion to shock as recognition dawned. These executives had all worked with Jasmine Williams for years. They had attended meetings with her, reported to her, discussed strategy with her. Yet none of them had recognized her beneath the disguise of Janet because they had never truly seen the cleaning staff as people worthy of notice. "I'm Jasmine Williams and the new CEO of this company, as my father's successor," she announced, though by now no introduction was necessary. Everyone was bewildered. Nobody expected that the cleaner they had belittled was now their CEO. The silence in the room was deafening, everyone's mouths agape. Jasmine tapped a small remote she retrieved from her pocket, advancing the presentation to specific evidence she had been gathering. "I've been documenting the toxic culture in this company, a culture that contradicts everything Williams Innovations claims to stand for." The video appeared on the screen, showing Gerald Hayes pouring water on Janet, captured from a security camera angle that clearly displayed his face, with the timestamp and location visible in the corner, leaving no room for denial. Gerald's face drained of color as he watched himself on screen, his habitual arrogance crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. "That's taken out of context," he stammered. "She was insubordinate. Pouring water on an employee is assault." Jasmine calmly cut him off. "There is no context that makes it acceptable." The presentation advanced again, showing Derek Phillips in his office, forcing Janet to clean the same surfaces repeatedly while making increasingly trivial complaints. Derek Phillips, marketing director, has routinely abused his authority to waste cleaning staff time, forcing unnecessary work and creating deliberate dominance. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but Jasmine continued without allowing him to interrupt, systematically moving through the evidence she had gathered. As the evidence mounted, some board members began taking notes furiously, while others sat back, expressions of shock or disgust spreading across their faces. One elderly board member removed his glasses, polished them as if the action might somehow change what he was seeing, and then shook his head in disbelief when the evidence remained just as damning. Veronica Wells was the first to attempt a defense, her sales executive instincts pushing her to control the narrative. "This is a gross mischaracterization. That video has clearly been edited to make it look like..." Veronica's voice trailed off as Jasmine cut her off by advancing to the next slide. It was a different camera angle of the same incident, showing the slap from a perspective that captured both Veronica's face and the shocked reactions of the witnesses. "Would you like me to play the audio as well, Miss Wells?" Jasmine's voice was calm. "Your exact words were, 'Don't you ever talk back to me. You are nothing here. Nothing.'" Veronica fell silent, her carefully crafted professional image shattered beyond repair. By the time Jasmine concluded her presentation, the atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted completely. The arrogance and entitlement that had characterized the accused executives had crumbled, replaced by a mix of shock, fear, and frantic calculations for potential escape from the situation. Gerald Hayes, seeing the inevitable end, knew it was over for him. "I thought you were just an ordinary cleaner. Please, don't let me lose my job," he pleaded. The door opened just then, revealing two security officers stationed outside. "Mr. Hayes, we've been instructed to ensure you leave the premises after this meeting," one of the officers said. Gerald turned back to face Robert Williams, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done for this company." "After everything you've done to this company," Robert corrected, standing to address the room for the first time since Jasmine had started her presentation. "What we've witnessed today isn't just about individual behavior, though that alone would justify immediate termination. This is about a fundamental betrayal of everything Williams Innovations stands for." Robert moved to stand beside his daughter, a physical show of solidarity that sent a clear message to everyone in the room. "Jasmine undertook this investigation at my request, as part of our succession planning process. What neither of us anticipated was the level of corruption, discrimination, and abuse she would uncover." He turned to address the board members directly. "I founded this company on principles of integrity, innovation, and respect for every individual who contributes to our success. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of those values. Today, we begin the process of reclaiming them. The next hour was devoted to immediate actions. The board terminated Gerald Hayes, Karen Mitchell, Derek Phillips, and Veronica Wells for gross misconduct, effective immediately. Security was instructed to escort them from the building after they surrendered company devices and access credentials. They were all fired. Gerald's departure was equally revealing. As security prepared to escort him from the boardroom, he turned to Robert with a desperate appeal. 30 years, Robert. I've given this company 30 years. You can't just throw that away based on a few incidents taken out of context. Robert's response was measured but firm. You're right, Gerald. 30 years is significant, which makes it all the more disappointing that you chose to abuse your position, using your power against those with less, rather than embodying the values this company was built on. As Gerald was led away, Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction at the justice served. The meeting continued with a discussion of the immediate steps needed to address the cultural issues revealed by Jasmine's investigation. As the meeting concluded, board members approached Jasmine individually, some offering congratulations for her thorough investigation, others expressing shock and apologies for the mistreatment she had endured. She maintained the calm, strategic demeanor that had allowed her to gather evidence while enduring weeks of abuse. It was the same quality that would serve her well as CEO. When the boardroom finally emptied, leaving only Jasmine and her father, Robert embraced her, pride evident in his posture. "You've done something remarkable here," he said quietly. "Not just exposing corruption, but experiencing firsthand what needs to change. I couldn't have done it. My pride wouldn't have allowed me to maintain that cover through what you endured." Jasmine's eyes filled with unexpected tears, not from the memory of humiliation, but from the realization of how deeply this experience had transformed her understanding of leadership. Robert nodded. "The board wants to accelerate the succession timeline. After today's presentation, they're convinced you're ready." Jasmine gazed out over the city skyline, considering the weight of responsibility. She was about to assume the position and responsibility she had earned, and the changes she intended to implement. "I am ready," she affirmed, "but not because I am your daughter or because I have the right degrees. I'm ready because I've seen this company from the ground up. I've experienced what works and what urgently needs to change." She picked up the gray cleaner's uniform she had discarded during her revelation, folding it carefully instead of dismissively. "This taught me more about leadership than Harvard ever could, and I won't forget those lessons when I sit at the head of this table." As they left the boardroom together, Jasmine paused by the cleaning cart she had pushed for 2 weeks. "There's one more thing I need to do before this becomes official." The transformation of Williams Innovations didn't happen overnight. Cultural change required consistent effort, honest confrontation of ongoing issues, and the humility to admit that perfection was still far out of reach. There were setbacks and challenges, resistance from those who benefited from the old system, and the inevitable complications of implementing large-scale changes in a big organization. But 6 months after Jasmine's undercover journey ended, Williams Innovations had become a completely different company, one where employees at all levels reported higher job satisfaction, productivity measures showed steady improvement, and turnover rates dropped significantly, especially among underrepresented groups. For Jasmine herself, the experience brought about a personal transformation as deep as the organizational changes she had enacted. The physical demands of cleaning work had altered her body, building strength and endurance she hadn't known she needed. The emotional challenges of being treated as invisible had deepened her empathy and heightened her understanding of power dynamics in ways her privileged upbringing and education never could. These changes were evident in how she led. In executive meetings, she noticed who spoke and who was interrupted, consciously making room for diverse perspectives. When visiting departments, she greeted maintenance staff by name with the same respect given to directors. Her decisions were guided by a comprehensive understanding of how they would impact everyone in the organization, not just those with titles similar to hers. 3 months after the boardroom confrontation, Robert Williams officially announced his retirement and Jasmine's succession as CEO. Under her leadership, the company flourished in the years that followed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and hit the subscribe button now. See you in the next video.